Welcome to Heritage Mississauga's Saturday Matinee. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga. And today, in connection to an exhibit that has just opened at the Museums of Mississauga entitled Our Boys, the exploration and the stories of Mississauga's fallen soldiers from the First World War, we're presenting a presentation here today entitled Our Boys, and connecting to the research that was undertaken several years ago into documenting the life and times of Mississauga's fallen sons from the First World War. This research, in turn, which led to this presentation, has provided the material background for the exhibit at the Museums of Mississauga. A wonderful exhibit. We encourage people to go and visit it, and we'll be sharing the connection to that exhibit at the end of this program. But this presentation, again, entitled Our Boys, Mississauga Remembers the First World War. The program, the project, if you will, the research project came about as part of a virtual war memorial research project. With the idea being that Mississauga is not home to one single cenotaph or war memorial. In fact, we have many. We have many different forms of remembrance within our community, whether they be multiple cenotaphs or war memorials within the city, rules of honor in churches and congregations and social groups and the like, memorial windows, some soldiers who are not recorded in any fashion within our community. And so we sought, in the aspect of coming up with a virtual war memorial, a place to include the names and wherever possible the faces and stories of Mississauga's fallen soldiers, starting with the First World War, but growing. The project has grown to include other conflicts such as the War of 1812, the Fenian raids, the Riel rebellions and the Northwest rebellions, the First World War, and now our research is evolving into the Second World War. And there, of course, sadly, there are other conflicts yet to come when it comes to this research project, and remembering the children of this place who put their lives on the line and served elsewhere and did not return home. The vast majority of them never knew Mississauga by name, but they came from places like Arundel and Port Credit and Streetsville and Malton and Clarkson and the like, connecting to this place that we know as Mississauga today. They are the fallen within our community, and it is upon us to remember the names and the faces and the stories of those that came from here and did not return home. There are some remembrances, say that in war, the best of us put on a uniform and go and serve. And this project is not meant to exclude anyone who contributed and served and came home, of course, or those that did their duty here at home. The efforts on the home front were the fourth wave of the Army, if you will. The Navy, the Air Force, and the Army were supported ably by the efforts at the home front, and that's not to discount, and perhaps we'll explore those connections in other programs. But this program is going to focus solely on the fallen from historic Mississauga in the First World War. Right from the outset of the war is declared on August 4th of 1914. At the time that Great Britain declares war on Germany, Canada is but a dominion within the British Empire. We do not control our foreign policy at the time. When Great Britain declared war, Canada was automatically at war. That will change come the Second World War, but in the First World War, we are a colony of Great Britain. And the roles of the colony, this poster really tells it all. The Empire needs men. All answer the call. Helped by the young lions, the old lion defies his foe. Well, who's the old lion? It's pretty obvious that's Great Britain. And the young lions, you can see the four heads peeking over the rock there in the background. Australia, Canada, India, and New Zealand. Our job was to provide men, our soldiers. That was the job of the colonies, to provide that raw manpower to support the war effort overseas. To support that war effort here in Canada, what was known as Canadian Expeditionary Force was created with a main training base in Valcartier, Quebec. Over the course of the war, over 619,000 soldiers from across Canada enlisted in the Canadian Expeditionary Force. The conscription, the Military Services Act, so in the first years of the war, it was all through voluntary enlistment. In the late fall of 1917, the Military Services Act is passed and conscription is introduced amidst a great deal of opposition. It came into effect in January of 1918. Again, over 619,000 Canadians enlisted in the Canadian Expeditionary Force. 60,661 were casualties in the war. Approximately 1 in 11 soldiers in Canada did not return home. It's estimated somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1,600 men from Peel County enlisted, including a target between 700 and 800 men from historic Mississauga joined the Canadian Expeditionary Force. We don't have an exact number for those that served. What we do know is the number who fell. Of the approximately 700 to 800 soldiers to date, we've identified 96 fallen from historic Mississauga. An average rate of either 1 in 8 or 1 in 9 soldiers from historic Mississauga did not return home. It's a little bit higher than the national average of approximately 1 in 11. But numbers are hard facts, but they don't tell really the human story they're in. And sometimes we can get obsessed with statistics, and that takes away from the tragedy of even a single loss on the community. It's particularly more challenging when you look at kind of the breakdown of those that were lost. The known numbers, if you will, if we look at the numbers of fallen, 96 fallen from historic Mississauga. 78 names are listed on Mississauga-based cenotaphs and memorials throughout the community, whether they be inscribed on war memorials, on honor rolls, on commemorative windows, family gravestones, and the like. We've documented 78 of those 96 names are listed in some place in Mississauga. The average age of our fallen in the First World War is 24 years old. It's a little bit of a misnomer. We had a couple of soldiers that were in their mid-50s when they were killed in action. If you take those two individuals out of the equation, our number drops to just under 23 years of age. These were very much the youth of the community. Many of them we know little about, although we are always endeavoring to find biographical information, family information, and service records, and the real prize is the photographs. If we are looking to find photographs of individuals, everything that we find will be made available on a virtual war memorial on the website of Heritage Mississauga, and that is a work in progress, although we hope that will be up very shortly. And again, we're focusing here in this presentation on the First World War. Subsequent work has taken place in other conflicts, and this past summer working very diligently on the fallen from the Second World War. But for our project here and our presentation here tonight, again, looking at the young individuals, average age again 24 years of age, from places again like Port Credit and Clarkson and Lakeview and Cooksville and Dixie and beyond, all part of the landscape of historic Mississauga. Of the 96 known fallen, only a handful of them were married. Most of them were single. Just under 80 of them were single, unmarried individuals. Of those that were married, only a few had children. And so we are dealing in a way with a lost generation. We're dealing with a vast majority of individuals who never had the chance to marry and raise families and contribute to the evolving story of what would become the city of Mississauga. We look at the families left behind, the grieving families, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews, but also perhaps loved ones, whether it be fiance or girlfriend or the like. We have 96 young fallen from our community, and that's 96 young families, or most about 90 young families that never had a chance to start. It really becomes a heartbreaking tale when you look at kind of the human cost of casualties, even a single casualty, let alone 96 of them. When we look at the story of the First World War in Mississauga, we can start examining evidence left behind of what would have inspired soldiers to enlist. Again, these are young men at the time, really at the kind of the ending of the Victorian Empire. driven a lot by patriotic fervor, by a call to duty. Some of the posters really appeal to that, really looking at supporting the British Empire and doing your duty, whether it's through bravery, for honor, patriotism, a sense of adventure. Young man's dream to serve, to do your duty is really the call. But some of the posters, the propaganda posters, really start to play on that. But when you look at some of the things that would have been locally in the newspaper, these are both things from the Street School Review. They often said if they couldn't convince a soldier to enlist, or a young man to enlist in the Canadian Expeditionary Force, but through calling to a sense of honor, a sense of duty, a sense of bravery and loyalty and the like, then they try to guilt them in. And if that didn't work, then they went after the ladies in their lives, whether it be the wives or the mothers or the girlfriends, and really focusing on getting your soldier however they could. The recruiting sergeant's job was to every time he would pass through a community, would be to collect a certain number of soldiers was the aim, if you will. At one point, the recruiting sergeant went through Port Credit and had approximately 22 soldiers, the individuals enlist with the Canadian Expeditionary Force. Then he passed through Streetsville, and Streetsville only signed up 8, and the headline in the Streetsville Review was "Now We Are Ashamed." So again, you look at the ways in which recruitment worked. The desire was to get soldiers however you could possibly get them. But again, in the early years of the war, there was no shortage of volunteerism. That changed, of course, as the war progressed, and also as the casualties began to mount. Here's a picture from Port Credit's train station of August of 1914. You can see the burly fellow in the foreground with the uniform on. That's most likely a recruiting sergeant at the time. And you can see the eager young faces, the jubilation that's in the picture, the hats waving, the laughter, the smiles. You get the sense of the jubilation. This is the soldiers who have enlisted with the 4th Battalion, one of the earliest battalions, recruited at the end of August of 1914, within weeks of war being declared. These men are signing up. They're boarding a train at Port Credit. This train is going to go on to the exhibition camp at the Garrison Commons, now part of the Canadian National Exhibition Grounds. From there, they're going to get some rudimentary training. They're going to get some basic uniforms, and then they're going to be shipped off to Valcartier, Quebec. More training at Valcartier, ultimately destined to sail across the Atlantic, concentrate the efforts at the camp on the Salisbury Plain outside of London, England, where they'd be reorganized and redistributed as support battalions for British forces, at least in the onset of the war. These young fellows in this picture, the jubilation that's here, the excitement, the adventure that lies before them, have no idea on the road before them. This is August of 1914. They will not cross into France and be in harm's way until March of 1915. So there's a long path in front of them. Of course, they don't know that, and they also have no idea that the casualties will begin to mount. We don't know the names of the faces for most of these individuals during this photograph, but we do know some of our very first fallen from historic Mississauga were from Port Credit and were from the 4th Battalion. So there's all likelihood that one or two or more of the individuals in this photograph may have been amongst those that fell in the First World War. But again, the picture does tell 1,000 words, and really it's the jubilation in this picture. The war is in its infancy. Casualties have not yet begun to hit home. The band is playing music. The Ladies' Aid Society has showed up with food for the soldiers to send them off. There's speeches by politicians and the like. The boys are off on a grand adventure. Of course, the tone of that will change over time. But again, in this picture, that's all in front of them. The picture again from recruits as well. We can see just the age range that are drawing. This is one of the recruiting stations for soldiers to enlist was down at the Longbranch Camp, which was in Lakeview on the Arsenal land, south side of Lakeshore Road, just to the west of Dixie Road. And you can see just in this picture the different walks of life. You have some well-dressed individuals, older men, businessmen from the community perhaps. These what are honestly look like boys in the background, some of them in different modes of dress, and all showing up to enlist and do their duty, or what they see as their duty, and responding to advertisements like here in the newspaper from Streets for Review, just asking for volunteers to sign up and aid your king and country. There's an old adage for for king and country, and or for crown and country, and this really is emblematic in the times. And you see a picture like this where all walks of life showing up to enlist. Again, you see the smiles on the faces for the most part, and a rage of youth, and all those the war is yet in front of these people, and they really have no idea what to expect. And of course, again, with pictures, August of 1914, the casualties have not yet begun the news of casualties have not yet begun to trickle home. Again, a picture here. This is the 4th Battalion, the same group that we met in that first photograph of the Streetsville train station. They've received their uniforms. They are marching from the CNE camp, or what was on Garrison Commons, but at the CNE grounds, to Union Station, where they'll board another train and off to Valcartier, Quebec. Not a pleasant day by the look of it. If you see the picture, they're walking in the water. You can see the umbrellas in the background. Very closely on the left-hand side in the background, you'll see the tuba and the trumpet there. They look like they're being given a musical send-off, if you will. But police in the foreground are escorting them. You can see the officer there at the front of the line. His uniform looks slightly different. That's because his uniform was more adept at shedding water than were the plain wool uniforms of the rank and file behind him, which tended to soak it up. These boys, of course, are going to face some atrocious weather once they get overseas, and so this is they may be wet and bedraggled in this photograph, but they're going to see much worse once they pass into France. But again, that's a long road before them. This is early September of 1914. This is taken in the beginning of March in 1915 on the Salisbury Plain in London, and this is again entitled "The Port Credit Boys." These are members of the 4th Battalion. Again, likely some cross connections to the earlier pictures we saw, both of the train departing and of the soldiers marching toward Union Station. But we have names to go with this one, and we can look specifically on a couple of names that would ultimately become fallen soldiers with it. Mississauga's very first casualty in the First World War appears on the second one in the top right corner. That is Private John Leviston, who lived on Front Street south of Lakeshore Road in Port Credit. He would fall in at the end of March of 1915, the first of Mississauga's fallen soldiers. 95 others would follow him down that sad road. And so you begin to tell some of the stories just by the faces that we're able to gather. But again, indeed, these are all boys from the Port Credit area who are not yet passed into harm's way. They are about to, just after this picture is taken, they're about to embark across the English Channel and find their way into Belgium and France, where they will ultimately be on the front lines. But this picture, that path is yet in front of them. Pictures again begin to tell. This is July of 1915. Volunteers leaving the Streetsville train station, again similar to the one we saw earlier from Port Credit. The flags are flying, the speeches are being given, there's music being played, there's a meal being served to the departing soldiers. You can see a couple of hats in the air being waved. There's, again, great fanfare and jubilation as the soldiers depart. The date here, July 16th of 1915, leaving the Streetsville train station. Again, very similar to that picture we saw earlier from Port Credit. The soldiers at Clarkson train station, the spring of 1915. If you look closely, you'll see the soldiers are holding teacups in their hands, and they're eating something here. This is a hasty lunch or snack provided by the Clarkson Lower Park Women's Institute. They are having tea and strawberry tarts, and some stories that said apple tarts, but strawberry tarts seems to be the than likely in the Clarkson area, given the notion of Clarkson being the strawberry capital of Ontario. And so why are they stopped here, these soldiers? Well, as troop trains would be bringing volunteers from around the province into the Canadian Exhibition Camp in Toronto, and then ultimately, of course, again on the Valcartier, Quebec, they had some stopping points to kind of for refreshments, pre-organized stopping points. And one of those was in Clarkson, at the Clarkson train station. So this was an organized stop, if you will, and kind of to get their gears rolling, if you will, for a soldier. After lunch, they were to march to Port Credit along Lakeshore Road, as the story goes. And so these soldiers, after a little snack and a lunch here in Clarkson, would form up. Again, they're raw recruits. They would form up and they would march along Lakeshore Road, ultimately to Port Credit, where they would board a train and head on into Toronto and beyond. And the story goes is that pre-organized ahead of time, the soldiers were going to be surprised along Lakeshore Road in the Laird Park area by a bunch of schoolboys who were hiding in the ditches. And as the soldiers passed, they sprang up out of the ditches and pelted them with apples. No, it wasn't an affront. This was an organized attack to kind of see how the raw recruits fared under pressure, literally under fire, or at least under fire of sorts. And the newspaper simply recounts that after being confronted by flying apples, the soldiers quickly returned fire. That is, there was an apple fight in the spring of 1915 along Lakeshore Road in the Laird Park area. Again, this was by the officers of the time to test the mettle, if you will, of their young recruits. So not all stories around the First World War and service were that were dark stories, if you will. Again, an apple fight along Lakeshore Road. Colonel Thomas Laird Kennedy, TL Kennedy, TL Kennedy High School, Kennedy Road, and Tom Ken Road, Tom Kennedy, are all named for the same individual. One of our more well-known military and political figures, even served a partial term as Premier of Ontario at one point. Long-serving Minister of Agriculture after his military career. He was a veteran of the Boer War, and later volunteered his services with the Canadian Expeditionary Force during the First World War, largely in recruiting. And he formed a battalion of 98 volunteers out of Cooksville. These would be a mounted group, but not in terms of horses. They actually were a bicycle, a courier soldiers, a messenger service, a vital component of war service. And they are getting basic training. They are going to be soldiers, of course, as well. They're with a specific job, but soldiers nonetheless. And they've got their uniforms. They're getting some basic training at the Cooksville Fairgrounds, just south of Dundas Street and west of here Ontario Street. And this is a picture of those recruits at the Cooksville Fairgrounds in the spring of 1915. And then as part of the training exercise, those soldiers were marched along Dundas Street off to Hamilton, which was one of the training grounds. And so they got a long march ahead of them. This is Arundel Village, just at the Credit River and Dundas Street. Soldiers are heading westward towards Dundas, towards Hamilton along Dundas Street. The story goes that's Thomas Kennedy on the horse at the back. We don't know if that's the case or not, but that's the story that's been passed down. And this is his group of 98 volunteers, again known locally as Colonel Kennedy's Men, but they are destined again to become a bicycle messenger corps for the Canadian Expeditionary Force. And there's the same group of men at marching along Dundas Street at the Mississauga Road crossing. The steps in the background are the steps up to the original steps up to St. Peter's Anglican Church at the corner of Dundas Street and Mississauga Road. But there you can see the soldiers marching, band playing behind, or at least carrying their instruments behind, and the soldiers marching in file along Dundas Street. And again, spring of 1915. Streetsville as well, we have some pictures there. There is soldiers outside on the front steps along with the Reverend at Trinity Anglican Church at the north end of Streetsville in the summer of 1915. Some of these soldiers undoubtedly were the ones that were embarking from the train station, the Streetsville train station that we saw earlier. Longbranch Camp. We had military camp and training grounds in historic Mississauga as part of the Longbranch Rifle Ranges. Again, south side of Lakeshore Road, just to the west of Dixie Road. And here's a picture of the barracks being built in the foreground. And you can see the bell tents in the background where the recruits would have stayed. The Longbranch Camp in 1916 was one of the many bases around the province where recruitment and early training took place, again, before the soldiers would then make their way to Valcartier, Quebec, and then ultimately overseas. Many soldiers from historic Mississauga, or all soldiers from historic Mississauga, were connected to battalions, and those battalions were given a number here from the recruitment aspect here in Canada. They did not serve under that battalion number once they got overseas, generally speaking. Most Canadian battalions, once they went overseas, were reorganized, many as support units affiliated with other British units, but some, again, reorganized as Canadian units, but they didn't necessarily serve under the cap badge of the unit in which they enlisted. But nonetheless, we can see these are all units that have connections to historic Mississauga, and there are others as well, but these are the ones with the most number. So the 4th Battalion, the 10th Battalion, the 19th, the 48th, the 74th, the 75th, the 116th, the 126th, the 234th, and the PPCLI, or the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. The most, numerically, the most connections, over 300 soldiers from historic Mississauga served in the 126th. So that's probably our biggest detachment. The 234th did not see actual military engagement service. They were held in reserve, and then the war ended, and they ended up staying overseas and were involved in kind of reparations and bridge repair, roads, that sort of thing. But the other units certainly did, and they were numbered sequentially upon when they were raised. So just even from the spread of numbers, you can see that battalion after battalion was raised during the course of the war. The 4th Battalion raised in August of 1914, right at the onset of the war. The 234th was raised in the summer of 1916 locally. They did not get overseas until the beginning of 1918. And then by the time they were kind of their turn to go over into harm's way, the war was drawing to a close at the end of 1918. But nonetheless, you have all of these units serving mostly under the Maple Leaf, even though that is not the official flag of Canada at this point of the war. The Maple Leaf was certainly something they served under on their cap badge for the most part. And all of these units saw soldiers from historic Mississauga therein, and all of them saw casualties from historic Mississauga. And so we have these connections to these very poignant symbols of Canadian military service. The cap badges can be powerful visual elements. Many of them you can find at militaria shows and the like as being actual cap badges from the time. And again, the most common in terms of a single unit that saw soldiers from historic Mississauga was the 126th, raised largely in South Mississauga. Some known casualties, casualty locations for soldiers from historic Mississauga, and there's no single location. They're spread all over the front. Again, 96 fallen. They're not all accounted here on this list, but these are some known locations: Ypres and Festubert and Cosselaire and Saint Eloi and the Somme. Of course, the Somme, deadly battle of attrition, mud and blood, as it was referred to. 16 dead at the Somme. Vimy, that high point of Canadian achievement during the First World War, 7 dead from historic Mississauga. Passchendaele, 8. And the list goes on. Our fallen, our boys are scattered throughout the Western Front in Europe and France and Belgium and even Germany and the like. We've fallen all over the front in the First World War. Just to connect on kind of some significant moments within the greater First World War, particularly with not only Canadian but Mississauga involvement. The Battle of the Somme really cemented the fact that this would be a long, drawn-out conflict. The battle raged from July to November of 1916 to an absolutely atrocious butcher's bill, if you will. 24,000 Canadian casualties, including 16 killed from historic Mississauga. 5 alone from our community fell on October 8th on the disastrous raid on Regina Trench. Just a heartbreaking moment. And we're dealing with, again, our soldiers arrived at the front in March of 1915. At this point, war has been raging for over a year, and the casualties have mounted, although at first they were slight. One casualty is too many, of course, but early in the war, the casualty numbers were much lower. It really is into the summer and fall of 1916 when the numbers begin to mount, and that news begins to filter home. And the understanding is that this will not be over quick, and that there's going to be a very, very heavy price to pay in terms of casualties, and that's something to bear in mind as we look at kind of the stories of the fallen, as well as that as the war progresses, the casualty rate only gets higher. Vimy, from the Somme, we're going to jump ahead to the Battle of Vimy Ridge, really the Canadian story of achieving the unachievable. The attack was concentrated as part of the spring offensive and lasted for 3 days from April 9th to the 12th, 1917. 15,000 Canadians and 4 divisions under Canadian command for the first time, Canadian Field Command. And of the 15,000 Canadians soldiers that participated at the Battle of Vimy Ridge, 3,598 killed, 7,000 wounded. Absolutely atrocious casualty counts from the Canadians, but they did achieve the objective. Within that count, 50 soldiers from historic Mississauga served at the Battle of Vimy Ridge, or about there. I think we're up to about 52 known soldiers at Vimy Ridge. 7 killed, 11 wounded, and 1 died of wounds later. Brigadier General A.E. Ross, viewing the Canadian advance at Vimy, referenced that in those few minutes, I witnessed the birth of a nation. Canada was really seen to stand up and answer the call and be known not to retreat from an objective. They became a very feared adversary on the British. On the German side, one of the historians writing about Germany said that when the German army knew that they were facing Canadians, they always ordered up more ammunition because they knew that they wouldn't be able to stem the tide of the Canadian attack. The Canadians at the time were flying, were serving under a flag that was not one that we know as a Canada flag. Of course, that didn't come around for many years after the First World War. We served under a variation of the British Red Ensign, and this flag that's in the bottom corner there is known as the Vimy Red Ensign, which was the flag that flew at the Battle of Vimy Ridge. It survived the battle and made its way into museum collections. And really became the inspiration for Canada's first national flag, which was adopted in 1921, which was the Red Ensign. That would in turn be replaced by the maple leaf that we know today many years later. But the Canadian symbol arguably is born at the Battle of Vimy Ridge, that we might be British subjects, but we are something different. We are Canadians standing up as Canadians. And again, at Vimy, Canadians organized as a Canadian, as 4 Canadian divisions under Canadian Field Command for the very first time, and achieving what was previously unachievable. From there, we go to Passchendaele, and just an atrocious battlefield referred to by both sides as the Battle of Mud and Blood, where mud was said to be so deep that not only would it swallow a soldier, but it would swallow the horse that he was riding on. This is where you kind of get the imagery of the atrocious conditions of the battlefield and the trenches and the like, of shell craters filled with water and mud, and part of it was bad weather. Part of it was also, the destroyed irrigation channels and flooded farm fields and the like, and just made for horrible conditions on the front. Again, Passchendaele was part of the Third Battle of Ypres, and 4,028 Canadians killed, 12,000 wounded, including 8 from historic Mississauga that lost their lives on the advance at Passchendaele. And just, again, atrocious. This took place in October and November of 1917. When we look at our fallen, we are putting some faces to names. The names on the list there, the yellow ones, are the ones that we have known portraits for, and this is an evolving thing as research continues. It constantly continues. But our first to fall in March of 1915 is the grainy picture at the bottom there. That is Private John Leviston of Port Credit. And following him also of Port Credit, Adjutant Lieutenant George Gordon Duncan. Later in the war, his brother Alan Duncan will also fall, and that's not unheard of. There are several instances of families losing more than one sibling or family member in the war itself. Each year, that was 1915 and 1916, we see the list grows longer, the names including the fellow in the bottom here. This is Private Edward Cosmo Innes. His attestation papers say he was 19. His other indications suggest he was much younger and may have lied about his age. We see the newspaper columns there for Lieutenant Lance Corporal Frederick Anthony Tapp, and he served along with his 5 adult sons. He was in his 50s. Thankfully, the sons all survived, but the father was killed in action. And for each one of these ones, we have portraits, which can be haunting if you look in the eyes instead of a life that comes to an end. But we have stories of their service records and biographical information and the like. And this is things that we'll explore in greater detail once the virtual war memorial is online and running on Heritage Mississauga's website. But again, we have a great deal of stories, like one of them not featured here from a photograph, but Private Frederick Graham, who actually served under the name Joseph Garbett. And we do not know why he served under an alias. There's no reason. He was of age. There's nothing that comes to light, but for whatever reason, he did not serve under his own name, and it wasn't until he was killed in action and a review of his paperwork highlighted the fact that he was serving under an alias. Again, not explained. He may have taken that story with him to the grave. Arthur Fry, the fellow with the 48th Highlanders in the bottom right there with the mustache, he was one of the few that was married with children. The story goes on. We have stories for many of these individuals going on. In 1917, the list goes even longer. We have Private Dennis Anger of Arundel, who attended St. Peter's Anglican Church. He's the fellow in the left photograph at the bottom there. He was killed just a few days before the advance at Vimy Ridge. He fell on April 1st of 1917 during a reconnaissance mission to review enemy trenches. An officer that he was with Colonel Beckett of the 75th was shot, and Private Anger, trying to retrieve or trying to aid the fallen officer, himself was shot and killed by the same, or presumably by the same sniper. So Dennis Anger was killed in the line of duty, and the picture beside him, the older fellow with the mustache and the sepia there, you'll see Captain W.H. Clipperton. One of the things that are fascinating about his story, he's a math teacher, born and raised in Streetsville, and he enlisted initially as a captain, an older man, educated, but he reverted to rank down to lieutenant so that he could serve on the front lines. His father cautioned him against doing that. He did so anyways, and ultimately lost his life in the process. But again, you can just see we have each one of these individuals has a story therein, including the third name from the last of the 1917 fallen is Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Thompson of Port Credit. He was our highest ranking officer to lose his life in the First World War. And the Legion in Port Credit is named in his honor, the Colonel Alex Thompson Memorial Legion. Again, a favorite son of Port Credit, and his career was followed with great interest in the newspapers. Private Fletcher Oswald Miller from the Meadowville area, one of our few Meadowville soldiers in the First World War. His family chose to honor him with a gravestone at Eden Cemetery up in Meadowville. He's not buried there. He's buried over in France, but his name rests on a family cemetery stone in the Meadowville area. In 1918, our list grows even longer. We have individuals like Lance Corporal Egerton Sayers. He's of the Harris Sayers family of Benares through the museums of Mississauga. Today, we also have Captain Alan Duncan, whose older brother was killed in 1915, and he in turn loses his life in 1918. Lieutenant Charles John Nairn. Again, running names off here, but all of these individuals we have photographs of and stories of, and we really encourage you for more information to explore the Virtual War Memorial once it is up and up and running on Heritage Mississauga's website, just for more photographs and biographical information and remembering the names. There was a saying, and I'm remiss of not mentioning it earlier, but there was a saying went back in connection to a historian writing about the War of 1812 on remembrances and talking about the rising generation, and it was our duty to remember these stories to inform the rising generation. And arguably, we have not done that. We've not lived up to that charge, if you will, or that expectation when it comes to not only the First World War, but fallen from other conflicts as well. Again, we're looking to explore those lives and remember those individuals, not only just through name, but also the photographs and the stories that we're able to uncover. And that's the basis and the rationale behind the Virtual War Memorial. Brothers in arms, again, there were families. We already mentioned the Duncan family losing two brothers. The Thompson brothers, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander and Lieutenant Douglas Thompson, both losing their lives in the war. And the Whitehead brothers, probably no family tugs at the heartstrings in historic Mississauga more than the Whitehead family of Malton. Three brothers, all serving, George, and then twin brothers Robert and Arthur, all falling in service during the war. Robert dying of illness before he even leaves England. He dies at Shorncliffe in England. George and Arthur are both killed in active duty. And so you can see a family here at home, which at the time included a mother, father, and a sister, receiving news that their three sons, their three brothers, have lost their lives during the course of the war. Very shortly thereafter, both parents succumb at home. And then in 1921, the sister passes away. We're not sure if it was in childbirth or whatnot, but within a very short period of time, this family is wiped off the map in terms of its connections here in historic Mississauga. Three brothers in one family paying the ultimate sacrifice. And you look at remembering those that served and those that did not return home, and one loss is too many, but having a single family bearing the loss of three is just a heartbreaking moment in history. And the pictures, again, tell it all. There are, we don't have pictures for everyone. That's one obvious thing about our research. There are some gaps. There are some holes in our knowledge. But, Perkins Bull, William Perkins Bull, writing in the 1930s, did a great job of collecting photographs of known service members. But again, we've expanded on that and continue to expand on that. There's a great deal that we still are seeking to find and to examine when it comes to the war. With the cessation of the war, the armistice is declared on 11 a.m. on November 11th of 1918. Of course, we reflect on that date and that moment in time as Remembrance Day today, but that comes about with the armistice of the First World War. November 11th is not the end of the war. The armistice is actually extended 3 times, and it's not until the Treaty of Versailles is signed at the end of June of 1919 that the war officially comes to a close. Following that, the demobilization of Canadian soldiers begins, and the returning soldiers, or the soldiers begin to return home. And here we have what's now called a Return Man's Parade. That's the Credit River at the Lakeshore Road, crossing the new bridge is under construction in this photograph. That's the concrete arch bridge, and so they're crossing over on a Bailey Bridge on the Credit River here, and they're marching westward. The train dropped them off. They exited the train near Longbranch, and then marching across Lakeshore Road for a destination at the Haberlin Estate, which was adjacent to what is now Brookner Rhododendron Gardens. And there's the gathering, the social gathering at the Haberlin Estate. There was music and games and lots of food to eat. A contest called the Greasy Pig, which we're not quite sure what that was, and a speech by the Honorable Arthur Meehan, who would later become Prime Minister of Canada, who officially demobilized and released the soldiers from service. And so this was a returning party that was held in August of 1919 at the Haberlin Estate in Port Credit. Again, the victory party to release the men from service. This is also taking place at the time of the Spanish flu, when we talk about pandemics, and really connecting to what we're going through now in these times. But that's something that they were dealing with at the time. Many of the soldiers coming home were infected. Spanish flu was indeed hitting the residents of historic Mississauga throughout these times as well. But nonetheless, this is the victory party that was held in August 4th, I believe, 1919, at the Haberlin property in Port Credit. When it comes to remembering the service, remembrance, war memorials, and cenotaphs, there are a couple of things that really resonated within the community, and those became associated with loss and commemoration of service. This is a picture looking south on Stavebank Road in about 1918 to 1920. And on the left there, you can see the Port Credit Bandstand. The bandstand, a place of gathering, of frivolity, of music, of dance, of community spirit historically, during the war years became more associated with the place of sadness and of loss. It was on the bandstand that notices of the dead were posted in the First World War. And after the war, when there was interest raised locally of commemorating the local soldiers who had fallen with the type of war memorial or cenotaph, it was the location of the bandstand that made the logical choice, and that is where the Port Credit War Memorial was created and unveiled in 1925. So the Port Credit War Memorial is our oldest cenotaph or war memorial in Mississauga. It was unveiled on Thanksgiving of 1925. It's designed after what's known as the Cross of Sacrifice, and has strict measurements. The Cross of Sacrifice was designed in very specific ways. One of the neat motifs for the Cross of Sacrifice was in its implementation, there were to be no true vertical or horizontal lines. Every horizontal line was to be the apex of a circle that met 1,000 feet underground, and every vertical line was to be the base of a triangle that met 1,000 feet in the air. The idea of a cenotaph or war memorial was to be the physical embodiment of heaven and earth. And so there are some slight nods to that tradition of Cross of Sacrifice that appears in Port Credit's war memorial. And as of only a couple of years ago, the surrounding parquet that is home to the Port Credit War Memorial is officially known as Vimy Park, in association to the commemoration of the Battle of Vimy Ridge and the 7 Mississauga soldiers who fell there. So just some strong connections within our community, and one of the many sites of remembrance services in Mississauga each year. Again, Mississauga, not a single town that grew to become a city, but rather one born through amalgamation. And most of our war memorials and cenotaphs and honor rolls and the like predate the city of Mississauga and connect to one of the many various historic locations within the city itself, like Port Credit and Streetsville. So Port Credit was unveiled in 1925. Less than a year later, on July 1st of 1926, Streetsville unveiled their cenotaph. And this is right in downtown Streetsville at Main and Queen. Cenotaph was moved and rehabilitated only a few years ago, but still on Main Street, just a little bit further down towards the Credit River than it was in its original location, but nonetheless still a very significant and prominent monument within the village core of Streetsville. And again, that was unveiled in July of 1926. Not to be outdone, there are other cenotaphs around Malton and Lakeview and the Cookeville-Dixie Cenotaph and Spring Creek amongst our newer ones. And the Mississauga Civic Memorial, which was unveiled in 2011, really connecting to places of remembrance and observance for those that served and fell from historic Mississauga and indeed from Mississauga itself in the post 1968. And other places we have commemorations and local cemeteries. We have honor rolls and lists of service and plaques and commemorative windows and the like. Quite a number of ways in which our fallen veterans are remembered throughout our community. Again, of Mississauga's 96 fallen soldiers, 78 of them have their names somewhere within the city in terms of commemoration, whether it be on cenotaphs themselves, their honor rolls, their memorial windows, and the like. So there may be more, but that's we found 78 of those names in different areas of our city during the course of this research. And we're going to touch, just to close here, on the Our Boys exhibit. Encourage anyone looking to kind of get out and re-engage with culture down at the Bradley Museum and at Benares Historic House. You'll have a chance to engage with the Our Boys exhibit, which is produced by the Museums of Mississauga. The exhibit runs from September 3rd to January 8th, and log on to the Mississauga Museums of Mississauga website through the Culture Division of the City of Mississauga to learn more information about accessing this exhibit. Again, principally it's held at the Bradley Museum down in Clarkson, with smaller components at Benares and at other locations in the area. But Our Boys, a story of Mississauga's fallen soldiers from the First World War, largely brought to life out of the research that was done as part of this project, and we're so happy to play a very small role in this and celebrating the story of Mississauga's fallen soldiers from the First World War in the Our Boys exhibit. So I really encourage anyone looking to explore further to see the exhibit in person, and also to look forward to our virtual war memorial at Heritage Mississauga. So well worth a great deal more information available on the life and times of Our Boys, the fallen soldiers from historic Mississauga during the First World War. So with that, thank you, and we look forward to exploring the topics of the First World War with you in greater detail down the road, looking at things like the home front and some specific service elements of the First World War, like the aerodrome in Lakeview and service of pilots with the Royal Naval Air Service and the Royal Flying Corps. Even just the exploits of Canadian soldiers, the individuals themselves, who their life and times, and some of the biographies therein. So different ways that we can engage and explore the topic of the First World War, and I look forward to sharing them with you down the road. So thank you, and we will remember them. And again, we look forward to having you come out and see the Our Boys exhibit. Thank you.